Committee on Government Operations will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to thank you once again for the delay and for your graciousness with that. Obviously, the Office of Justice Programs, or OJP, as it's commonly referred to, is the largest of three departments of the Department of Justice grant-making entities. OJP gave out more than $4 billion in fiscal year 2015, with about $1.2 billion issued for state, local, and tribal law enforcement, plus another $251 million for the juvenile justice initiatives. That's a lot of the programs and a whole lot of money. There's no doubt that grants can provide an important resource to state and local government entities, allowing them to do important work in many areas, including crime prevention and reduction of recidivism. The Office of Justice Programs has a responsibility to effectively manage its grants program, and it's our job in Congress to make sure that OJP is carrying out its responsibility and spending the taxpayer dollars responsibly and effectively. Over the last decade, OJP has made improvements in its grant-making process, thanks in no small part to the oversight provided by GAO and the Inspector General. We are here today to discuss those improvements and also to discuss the status of some of the open recommendations made by both GAO and the Inspector Generals. While OJP has made progress in its grant management, the Inspector General's reports and audits show that there is still room for improvement. For example, the IG published a report last year that found that OJP's grant money was used to build 2 correctional facilities that were at least 250% larger than they needed, at an excess cost of some $32 million. This was a $70 million grant to the Navajo Division of Public Safety to plan and construct a tribal justice facility. And somewhere along the way, the plans changed, and there was a massive increase in the size and scope of that facility. One of the facilities had an approved plan for a 42-bed prison. They ended up building a facility that had 132 beds. This despite having an average jail occupancy between 14 and 22 inmates a month. The other facility, with averages of 7 to 11 inmates, ended up with 80 beds. They built these buildings so big that they do not have enough money to fully staff them. They sit there today largely empty, a $70 million price tag for nearly empty prisons. Look, my issue here is not about the grant itself. I can tell you that in my district, there have been the deployment of some of these grants in ineffective ways. But it's blatantly mismanaged taxpayer dollars, plain and simple, that we have to address. And here is the question I would like to get to today. Are we actually managing these grants at a sufficiently detailed level to achieve results, prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, or are we just checking the boxes? And so I'm interested to hear from all of our witnesses today on the many issues presented by the DOJ's grant management and the progress that has been made and the progress that still needs to be made. And so with that, I would like to now recognize my good friend, the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for her opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for attending this subcommittee on government operations. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing to highlight very important office at the Department of Justice, that being the Office of Justice Programs. Currently, OJP oversees 7,000 active grants, some of which are mandated by Congress, totaling more than $7.5 billion. As a former prosecutor and also an official at the Department of Justice, we're working under the Deputy Attorney General's office. I oversaw some of OJP's work. I know firsthand what an important partner OJP is to our local and state governments by providing resources for training, coordination, and equipment to support law enforcement efforts. OJP funds are used to support anti-gang initiatives, bulletproof vest purchases, and programs to counter spousal or child abuse and human trafficking. These grants make a difference in people's lives. Just 2 weeks ago, OJP reported that the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force, funded through OJP grant program, arrested more than 1,300 suspected child predators. Last fall, OJP announced the addition of 5 cities to the Violence Reduction Network, a collaborative program between DOJ and cities which have contributed to the arrests of criminals suspected of violent crimes such as sexual assault and homicide. As part of its own oversight, OJP assesses the risk of all grant applicants and grantees to identify any high-risk grantees that may require additional controls or corrective actions. In fact, OJP actually exceeds the 10% statutory goal for conducting extensive monitoring of grant dollars, and less than 1% of grants are currently considered as high risk. To supplement its internal efforts, OJP relies on the Office of the Inspector General. Independent audits of grantees and review of OJP grant management, like those conducted by the Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office, which are here with us this afternoon, have aided the office in making improvements to its management processes. While both the IG and GAO, that's a lot of acronyms there, have singled out specific grant programs for concern in recent years, OJP has acted in good faith to implement corrective recommendations and close out those cases. As a result of IG recommendations, OJP has taken significant steps to change its policies and procedures, clarify or issue guidance, put in place performance control, and remedy unallowable costs. For example, OJP has requested Treasury send a collection notice to recruit unsupported expenditures from one grantee and has offered individualized technical assistance to all grantees under the DNA Backlog Reduction Program as it works to update its program guidance. In 2012, GAO found that DOJ needed to put into place better controls to reduce the risks of duplication of grant awards, including OJP grants. As a result, DOJ granting agencies now coordinate with one another to ensure that grantees are not unnecessarily receiving duplicative awards. OJP's improvements to its grant management controls over the past decade have been welcomed by grant applicants and recipients. For example, OJP created the Office of Audit Assessment and Management in fiscal year 2007 to conduct audits of OJP processes and risk assessments of grant programs, oversee program monitoring, and create policies to improve OJP grant management. Since then, applicants report experiencing better communication of the grant peer review process, receiving a more transparent and timely review of the strengths or weaknesses of the grant proposal, and have frequent communication about grant requirements and policy changes. These changes make OJP and OJP are lowering the risk to taxpayers, but there's always room for improvement. It is essential for OJP to continuously evaluate its programs with the IG and with GAO for lessons learned and to identify ways to improve its oversight and monitoring of grant programs to ensure that funding is effectively and efficiently used by grant recipients. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about their observations and suggestions for assisting OJP and this subcommittee in conducting robust oversight of these grant dollars, which are vital to our state and local partners. Thank you.
I thank the ranking member for her comments and well thought out delivery. And so as I enter into this, I just want to thank all of you for coming. I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our panel of witnesses. Pleased to welcome the Honorable Michael Horowitz. Welcome back, Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Ms. Beth McGarry, Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Office of Justice Programs at the Department of Justice. Welcome. Ms. Greta Goodwin, a PhD, Acting Director of Justice and Law Enforcement Issues on the Homeland Security and Justice Team at the Government Accountability Office. Welcome. And Mr. Jeffrey Sedgwick, PhD, Executive Director of the Justice Research and Statistics Association. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify, so if you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. And in order to allow time for discussion, please limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. However, your entire written statement will be made part of the record. And so, Mr. Horowitz, I'd recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. From fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 2015, OJP awarded over $10 billion in grants to thousands of recipients. During that same time period, the OIG issued approximately 100 audits of OJP grant awards, containing about 700 recommendations and identifying approximately $100 million in dollar-related findings. In fiscal year 2015 and 2016, Congress additionally authorized the Department to issue over $5 billion in Crime Victims Fund awards, with the vast majority likely to be OJP grants. This significant increase in CVF grants requires OJP to have sufficient controls and oversight in place to ensure that those funds are used appropriately. We are currently conducting a risk assessment of OJP's management of CVF grants in light of this funding increase, and we're also auditing CVF grantees and subgrantees' use of these funds. Over the past several years, OJP and the Department have made positive strides in improving their grants management, including implementing online grants management training, enhancing its management of high-risk grantees, and consolidating grant rules that had been promulgated separately by 3 DOJ grant-making agencies into a consolidated Department grants financial guide. While these advances are encouraging, protecting taxpayer funds from mismanagement and misuse remains one of the most significant challenges facing the Department. The Department must undertake robust efforts to ensure that the billions it gives out in grants are appropriately spent and that the public receives the expected return on its investment. Our past work has identified several instances where the Department grant monitoring was too limited and where site visits were too few. In particular, we found breakdowns in monitoring subgrantees to ensure that they are fulfilling all grant conditions. It's also important for the Department to develop a results-oriented performance measures approach to ensure that grant programs are meeting their intended goals and producing a measurable outcome. Such measures are critical for the Department to effectively assess which grant programs should receive valuable taxpayer funds. In addition to our audit work, the OIG conducts grant-related investigations into possible fraud, embezzlement, and conflicts of interest. In the past 5 fiscal years, those investigations resulted in 13 criminal convictions and more than $6 million in restitution and recoveries. Our office participates in other efforts to improve grant management and reduce fraud across the federal government. I chair the Grant Fraud Working Group of the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force, a diverse coalition of IG offices and executive branch agencies. The working group looks to improve our ability to investigate and prosecute grant fraud matters. It played a key role in developing grant fraud training for special agents, government prosecutors, and auditors. The working group also serves as an information sharing platform regarding best practices and our ongoing data analytics efforts. In concluding, I want to thank the committee for its bipartisan support of the IG Empowerment Act. The bill contains several important provisions that will assist inspectors general in conducting effective oversight, including of grant awards. For example, the bill ensures that IGs will have timely and unimpeded access to agency and grant recipient records. It allows OIGs to match data across agencies to help uncover improper payments and wasteful spending, which will improve our ability to detect grant fraud and uncover duplicative grant awards. And it provides OIGs with testimonial subpoena authority. which will be a particularly helpful tool in enabling IGs to gain critical evidence when conducting civil and administrative grant fraud investigations. I very much appreciate the House of Representatives passing the legislation, and I hope that the Senate will take action soon so that all inspectors general are able to conduct their important work effectively. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz, and I want to thank you for your continuing work. As you know, the inspectors general provide a critical role in a number of scenarios, and it's always good to have you before this committee. Ms. McGarry, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Meadows, and thank you, Congresswoman Plaskett, and distinguished members of the committee. I am pleased to have this opportunity to discuss the Office of Justice Program's commitment to rigorous oversight of its grants program and our collaboration with the Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General, and the Government Accountability Office. These collaborations strengthen and support OJP's grant oversight process. I am Beth McGarry, the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General for OJP. Prior to my service in this position, I was an Assistant United States Attorney and the Career Deputy Assistant Attorney General at OJP. Every day across the country, OJP grantees do amazing work preventing and controlling crime, administering justice, and assisting crime victims. For example, 2 of our Justice Reinvestment Initiative states, Georgia and North Carolina, have both reduced their prison populations and reinvested the cost savings to add community probation and parole officers and intervention and treatment programs. We are honored to call the recipients of these 7,000 grants partners, and we take very seriously our responsibility to be vigilant stewards of taxpayer dollars as we manage the public funds behind these grants. Key to these efforts is OJP's Office of Audit Assessment and Management, which was stood up in 2007. OAAM establishes a stronger oversight structure for OJP's multi-billion-dollar grant programs. With congressional support and through OAAM's leadership, OJP has implemented a robust framework of oversight across its grants programs. Congress also requires OJP to conduct comprehensive monitoring of not less than 10% of total award dollars. Demonstrating its commitment to this requirement, OJP consistently exceeds this 10% level each fiscal year. In fiscal year 2015, OJP monitored 20% of award dollars, completing in-depth programmatic and financial monitoring twice the amount required by law. Given the magnitude of the oversight required, it is essential that we focus monitoring efforts on grants where there is the most risk to federal resources. To accomplish this, OJP uses a risk-based assessment and analytic approach to oversight. This approach entails analyzing myriad criteria during both the grant application and post-award phases. In addition, OJP developed rigorous monitoring standards and procedures to ensure that grant awards are assessed, the information collected is analyzed, and determinations made regarding the grantee's performance on all programmatic, financial, and administrative requirements of award. OJP recognizes that we must consider potential risks before individual grants are awarded. Last year, OJP implemented an enhanced pre-award risk process. Based on this analysis, OJP's program offices implemented actions to manage or mitigate and identify potential risks to the government by requiring increased oversight and financial training. Once awarded, OJP assesses grants against more than 24 risk factors and determines the appropriate monitoring plan. At a minimum, each grant award undergoes a desk review once a year. Informed by the annual desk reviews and quarterly risk-based assessment, OJP conducts in-depth programmatic and financial monitoring of selected grantees. We are honored that the Association of Government Accountants cited OJP's model as a best practice and that other federal agencies and the OIG have requested OJP's assistance to replicate our risk-based model. For grants recipients deemed high risk, OJP provides extensive monitoring and in many cases intensive technical assistance. When warranted, we freeze grantee funds or refer the grantee for investigation by the OIG. The OIG is a critical part of the federal oversight framework. OJP works as a liaison between the OIG and the grant recipient to ensure that the findings identified in the OIG audit reports are corrected properly. OJP also uses the audit reports to strengthen our internal controls and grant monitoring. Also, we work with the GAO to strengthen our programs. Preventing wasteful duplication in government programs is a critical priority for DOJ and OJP. The department's 3 grant-making components collaborate closely on the development and implementation of grant programs. Each year, the grant programs conduct an assessment to determine the risk of overlap. Through this collaboration, we ensure that our tribal grants are not duplicate but support complementary justice purposes. OJP values transparency in our grant operations. We have a dynamic website where we post all of our solicitations, grant awards, the DOJ financial guide, and grant information. I look forward to working with the subcommittee to ensure that our programs and activities meet the high standards that you expect of us and that the American people deserve. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
And thank you so much for your testimony, and thank you for your service. Ms. Goodwin, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Plaskett, I am pleased to be here today to discuss GAO's work examining the Department of Justice's grant program practices. Grants are an important tool the federal government uses to provide program funding to state and local governments. In fiscal year 2016, it is expected that the federal government will provide states and localities more than $650 billion in grants to fund a wide range of public policies, some related to criminal justice. DOJ has 3 granting agencies which provide grants that support victims' assistance, technology and forensics, juvenile justice, mental illness and substance abuse, policing, and other activities. My testimony today summarizes the progress DOJ and its largest granting agency, the Office of Justice Programs, or OJP, have made in addressing 17 recommendations from earlier GAO studies. I will highlight our key findings and the agency's efforts to address them in the following 3 areas: DOJ's overall grant administration practices, OJP's management of the Bulletproof Vest Partnership Program, and OJP's management of the Victims of Child Abuse Act Grant Program, or VOCA. With respect to DOJ's overall grant management, in 2012, we examined the extent to which overlap existed across DOJ grant programs and whether that contributed to the risk of unnecessary duplication, whether DOJ had taken steps to reduce overlap and the potential for unnecessary duplication, and how DOJ used monitoring and assessment to determine grant program effectiveness, as well as how it used the results to enhance its grant programs. We found that DOJ had not assessed its grant programs to identify overlap, nor had DOJ routinely coordinated grant awards to avoid unnecessary duplication. We also reported that DOJ could take steps to better assess the results of its grant programs. We made 8 recommendations to DOJ to enhance its overall grant administration practices. DOJ has implemented 7 and is making progress on the final recommendation related to codifying new policies and procedures. We also assessed how well OJP managed its Bulletproof Vest Partnership Program, which I'm going to refer to now as the Body Armor Program. In 2012, we examined the efforts OJP had underway to support state and local law enforcement's use of body armor, the extent to which there were controls in place to manage and coordinate these efforts, as well as factors related to body armor's use and effectiveness, and the steps OJP had taken to address them. We found that OJP could enhance grant management controls and better ensure consistency in its program requirements by improving grantee accountability, reducing the risk of grantee noncompliance, and ensuring consistency in its efforts to promote law enforcement officer safety. We made 5 recommendations to OJP to address each of these areas. OJP has implemented all 5. Finally, in our assessment of OJP's management of VOCA grants, in 2015, we reported on the extent to which OJP had ensured the timely expenditures of VOCA grant funding and assessed the performance of VOCA grantees. We found that OJP had several administrative review and approval processes in place that contributed to delays in grantees' ability to begin spending their award funds. We also found that OJP did not have complete data to assess VOCA grantees' performance against the measures it had established. We made 4 recommendations to OJP, and as of this July, 1 has been implemented. OJP is making progress on the 3 remaining recommendations, which relate to examining its administrative processes and project length, and establishing and enforcing clear program requirements. As you know, GAO annually conducts recommendation follow-up, so we will continue to monitor the implementation of our recommendations to DOJ and OJP. Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony and thank you for your service. Mr. Sedgwick.
Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the committee. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you today about the Department of Justice's progress in improving the operations and management of the Office of Justice programs. I say progress because, as you know from my resume, I've intermittently worked in the Office of Justice programs and its predecessor, the Office of Justice Assistance Research and Statistics, since 1984. Currently, I serve as the Executive Director of the Justice Research and Statistics Association, a national nonprofit association of analysts, researchers, and practitioners throughout the justice system dedicated to providing accurate and timely information in support of sound policy development. Created by the State Statistical Analysis Centers in 1974, JRSA works closely with the Bureau of Justice Statistics and other federal agencies to promote the effective use of criminal and juvenile justice information. I have the somewhat unique perspective of having worked within OJP to strengthen its management, and then after a lapse of 6 years away from OJP, coming back to view it from the outside as head of an organization that performs a significant amount of research, training, and technical assistance supported by OJP grants. That permits me to comment from my present position on whether the management improvements initiated 8 years ago have persisted and perhaps been extended, judging, of course, from the perspective of an outside observer. Members of this committee may remember the management challenges confronting OJP 8 years ago. Significant numbers of expired grants that had not been closed out with unexpended funds reverted to the Treasury, questions about the integrity of the grant-making process and whether or not awards were properly reflective of peer reviewers' scores of competing proposals, concern over whether grants and contracts were properly monitored and audited to assure performance and uphold OJP's fiduciary responsibility to the American taxpayer, and the lack of clean financial audits for OJP. Upon my departure in January 2009, OJP had a clean financial audit. The backlog of expired but unclosed grants was eliminated, with all deobligated funds properly reverted to the Treasury. A process was instituted that assured any deviation from peer reviewers' scores at awarding grants were clearly documented and justified by reference to publicly announced criteria, and the Office of Audit Assessment and Management was stood up, fully staffed and headed by an exceptionally talented and qualified leader. 6 years later, I returned to Washington to assume my current position, giving me an opportunity to see OJP management from the outside rather than the inside. I'd like to share with you my observations and the inferences I draw from them about the trajectory of management in OJP. First, I notice a number of new features of the grant-making process, which I heartily applaud. OJP now posts on its website a funding resource center listing all upcoming, current, and closed opportunities. This allows associations like mine to plan ahead, assemble good teams, and write excellent proposals to perform needed work on behalf of OJP bureaus. I also notice that there is a considerable degree of uniformity across solicitations issued by OJP bureaus, with common performance and reporting requirements, common scoring criteria for proposals, and a common set of statutory and financial management requirements. Equally pleasing to me is the longer window of time between the issuance of a solicitation and the deadline for proposal submission. Short deadlines disadvantage newer and smaller organizations that often have the most innovative ideas. And I've noticed that OJP now routinely returns to each applicant, successful or not, the peer reviewer's comments on his or her proposal. In the past, applicants had to request peer reviewers' comments, and they were often delayed as bureau staff edited those comments. In fairness, any organization that takes the time to write a grant application deserves prompt and complete feedback on their proposal so they have the opportunity to improve. All of these changes encourage more applicants to apply and increase the chance that taxpayer dollars will go to those with the most innovative ideas and the strongest subject matter expertise on their teams, a sign of good management. Supporting these improvements in the application process is a much more detailed and accessible grants management system with an extensive online training tool providing step-by-step guidance for meeting the OJP-specified reporting requirements and making necessary adjustments to projects as they unfold through the submission of grant adjustment notices. The detailed online training offered to every grantee at a time of their convenience is an enormous aid to grantees with everything spelled clearly out through step-by-step instructions. Again, a sign of good management. And finally, I'd like to comment on a small change, but one that says a great deal about the integrity of the current grant-making process in OJP. Since my return to Washington, I've noticed something new. Bureau heads and program managers will not meet with the head of an organization while a solicitation is open to which the organization may respond with a proposal. Every applicant plays on a level playing field whether they hover on downtown, the Beltway, or the Heartland. No preferential treatment, no insider access during proposal writing. Again, a sign of good management. As I commented at the beginning, I'm no longer in a position where I can knowledgeably comment on the specific management practices currently deployed in OJP, but I can make inferences from what I observe as one who does business with OJP on a now regular basis. My inference from what I've witnessed these past 18 months is that the trajectory of management improvement that I testified to previously in this chamber in September 2008 continues, and I applaud those responsible for carrying on in OJP a culture of continuous improvement.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Thank each of you for your testimony. And I'm going to recognize the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for holding this hearing about how we can bring much-needed transparency and accountability to the federal grant-making process. This is a bipartisan issue, which is why earlier this year we passed my bill, the GONE Act, requiring federal agencies to take action to identify thousands of expired grant accounts, which are costing the taxpayers millions of dollars. I'm pleased that legislation was signed into law and took a step in the right direction toward responsibly managing our grant accounts and eliminating wasteful spending. However, this process and in this hearing process, more work needs to be done to make sure agencies are appropriately monitoring and managing their grant accounts. These grants open opportunities and provide important resources to law enforcement and our communities, so we have a duty to ensure these funds aren't being wasted and taking away opportunities from other potential recipients. So again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the hearing, you holding it even as others are leaving, and we have an opportunity to finish some work. That's good work. Thanks so much.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Michigan and the ranking member for hanging with me on a fly-out day. You can normally smell the jet fumes shortly on leaving, and so I understand that you both may have other places to be, but we really appreciate you being here. So let me, I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes for a series of questions. Before I do that, I want to thank the staff. So many times we ask questions, we look at things, and good oversight really comes down to our staff and how well they do it. And we're about to leave for 7 weeks. They are so excited about that. But I want to make sure that part of the record is that we thank an incredible staff, both on majority and minority. The staffs do a great job in providing this. Ms. McGrary, I want to come to you a little bit because we hear a lot of glowing success stories, and yet I'm a little bit perplexed. We wouldn't be here today if everything was rosy, and so I want you to help me understand a little bit about what I mentioned in my opening statement about the prisons that were opened, I guess, on Navajo lands. I want to be the first one to be very clear. I have the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians who has enjoyed a grant by your group in a justice center in my home county. I'm one of the few members that actually, in fact, maybe the only member that has a congressional office on tribal lands. And so I enjoy an extremely good relationship with my Native American constituents, and yet recognize they're a sovereign nation as well. So this is not designed to really single this out as an entity, is more as hopefully an anomaly in how we can make sure that it doesn't happen again if it's as bad as what I read. And I guess when did the prisons open?
Chairman Meadows, thank you for your question. The grant was funded in 2009, and the OJP and OIG are still working to resolve these audit issues. And we rely heavily on the OIG's intensive, in-depth audits. And whenever issues are brought to our attention, we take action. And in fact, in the next several weeks, members of OJP leadership are going out to the Navajo Nation to meet with the Navajo leaders to discuss an agreement that will satisfy the OIG's concerns, but also meet the criminal justice needs of the Navajo Nation. So this audit is still, we're still resolving the issues with the OIG, but we take this matter very seriously, and we look forward to our continuing dialogue with the IG.
Well, I appreciate that. So when did the prisons open?
Chairman Meadows, I'm going to have to get back to you on the exact date. I believe that the Tuba City facility opened last year, and the Kayenta facility is just waiting one last construction permit for it to open, a water cooler.
So one of
sign-off.
them's open, one of them's not. So the one that's not open, I would assume it has no inmates in it.
Not until it has the final certificate of occupancy.
So what's the monthly occupancy of the one that is open?
Chairman, I will have to get back to you on the exact occupancy. I know that the Navajo Nation.
Average occupancy, I mean, plus or minus 2 inmates.
I can't give you those specifics. I'll have to get back to you. I know that the Navajo Nation is working closely with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to hire and train staffing to be fully operational.
Oh, so it's not operational.
I mean, it's operational, but I mean, to be at full capacity. I know it's not at full capacity, but I don't know the exact number.
Okay, because the numbers I have would suggest that it's far from full capacity. So the one that opened up, how many beds does it have?
I don't have the specifics of their.
Mr. Horowitz, can you help illuminate some of those questions for me?
I believe, and I could find it, I think here, it's about 80 or so beds, if I recall correctly, 80 to 90 beds.
All right, so
Our
the one
last-
that's open is the smaller of the 2 facilities.
And
is it?
our numbers that we last received, it appeared that it had about 82% vacancy rate at the point we last heard about it, which was probably towards the end of last year, early this year, in terms of its occupancy. Only 2 of the 11 parts of the facility at that point were yet opened. And part of the issue being, as Ms. McGarry said, and one of the criticisms and concerns we had is the way the federal government has set up these facilities, the Justice Department funds construction through their grants, but the Interior Department funds the staffing, or a portion of the staffing. And if those two
That's a real
agencies
problem, isn't it?
aren't, it is, and it was here we found, that if those two agencies don't have robust dialogues with each other, a facility can be built that is far too big for what staffing, either for its needs, as we thought here, but just generally, even moving away from this facility in particular, one that BIA can't afford to, the Bureau of Indian Affairs can't afford to staff.
Well, so the whole scenario, if you build it, they will come, is not necessarily true in this situation, as it relates to both inmates and people to actually have the facility staffed, is that correct?
That's correct.
So Ms. McGarry, and I'm going to close and go to the ranking member here. We'll have another round of questions, but I guess my concern is as we have this, and I understand your statement that you're taking it seriously, but with the lack of specificity with regards to, it's almost like we have this unbelievable outbreak of crime on the Navajo facility, that we start to build these huge facilities that we can't staff and we don't have enough inmates for them. How can we feel good about the process of the grant being given if, one, they're not finished, and we'll get to $32 million of, I guess, money that is out there? I mean, do you see a real systemic problem with our process, or is this it just happened that somebody who was managing it on this particular case failed to do what they were supposed to do?
Well, Congressman, there have been 2 intervening laws that have increased the criminal jurisdiction for the Navajo Nation.
Yeah, I'm very aware of those. Like I say, I've got Native American tribes in my area, and they actually lobbied for some of that. But it doesn't necessarily translate into additional inmates. It possibly would, but it doesn't necessarily. But those 2 laws wouldn't indicate that we should build a facility that is 2.5 times what the grant was made for, would it?
In this particular case, we consulted research from the National Institute of Corrections about planning correctional facilities for the future, recognizing that if there's intervening laws that greatly increase the criminal jurisdiction of a tribal community, that you are to recognize that and to not to build facilities that will last 20 years.
So, Mr. Horowitz, would you agree with that analysis?
I think it's obviously fine and smart to plan for a 20-year period.
Sure.
I think the issue from our standpoint was the building size is so disproportionate to what the current inmate population was, and frankly still is, once the prison's now open, that consistent with the master plan that was actually in place at the time at the Navajo Nation from 2007, 2008, that master plan has proven to continue to look quite accurate, and in fact, that was a document that should have been followed.
So they adjusted the master plan that they started with. I guess you adjusted it after the laws were passed, thinking that it was going to change?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you do see that it was an error at this point?
We're still working through these issues
Okay,
with the
well,
IG.
I'll come back, because I see it as a major error, and if that's going to be your testimony, we've got a little bit deeper dive to go into. It's one thing to make a mistake. It's another to ignore a mistake and not admit that you have it. And I guess if your statement is that you think that the jury is still out on this, we'll come back to that. I'm going to recognize the ranking member for a gracious 9 minutes if she needs it.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today and for the information that you're sharing with us. Ms. McGarry, I know that OJP has experienced some of those challenges that we are here talking about. And I understand, and it appears from the testimony, that improvement in your management processes are taking place. Can you verify the amount of closures in fiscal year 2015 of the amount of single audits and IG audit reports that were done?
Thank you, Ranking Member Plaskett, for your question. On those specific examples, I will have the numbers. I will have to get back to you, but
I have a listing of 208 single audits and 23 IG audit reports, which means the closure and implementation of 620 recommendations.
Yes, I recall that is our figure for last year.
Okay, Mr. Horowitz, it's good to see you again. And although I know that our staff are really happy for us to be gone for 7 weeks, I don't know about the district staff, how they feel about, us being there for 7 weeks now.
It is not vacation.
Right. So is it true that out of the 54 recommendations your office made in the 6 audits being highlighted here, OJP has closed 44 and resolved 8, so leaving only 2 recommendations unresolved?
I don't have the precise numbers with me, Congresswoman, but those numbers wouldn't surprise me generally. I think that what we found is we generally work with OJP to resolve our recommendations when they come out, and we have found that with many of the recommendations that they move forward and have closed them, and we worked with them to try and address the remaining audits, because as open recommendations, because as Ms. Goodwin noted with GAO, we also continue to do regular follow-ups with OJP and make sure that that happens.
How long do those take for the closing out of those audits, so the recommendations being implemented?
It depends. The vast majority get closed within, I would say, 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years.
Unfortunately.
Is that is that quick or is that long?
I think from our standpoint, we hope to close all recommendations out within 1 to 2 years. So once recommendations remain open for 2 years or longer, they start becoming a concern to us. And one of the things that we've done starting last year was post on our website all unimplemented recommendations, all open recommendations, so the public can see essentially an aging report of our open recommendations. And since we have posted that, there has been considerable follow-up in the department, including through the leadership of the Deputy AG's office, to try and move some of those to closure.
Do they always agree with the recommendations you're making and then implement them? Or are there instances where they're like, no, we don't agree with you and we're not going to implement that?
During my tenure in the 4 years I've been here, and my understanding from my predecessor, it was rarely the case, and it has been rarely the case, where we have not agreed. The Navajo Nation audit is one where there are open, from our standpoint, open unresolved recommendations, and we are continuing the dialogue with OJP to try and move towards a resolution process.
Okay, and Dr. Goodwin, I know that the GAO reports they're not audits, but is it true that DOJ has implemented about 13 of the 17 recommendations your agency has made to DOJ regarding department-wide and OJP-specific grant administration?
Yes, that's correct. The report we issued in 2012, that had 8 recommendations, and as of this July, they've closed 7. There's one, the final one, they are in the process of getting us the documentation, so we hope to close that out soon. But we don't close anything out until we've done our own review.
So every year, approximately how many audits or recommendation reports do you do for OJP?
I don't have the exact numbers on that, but we are continuously, being asked to look at OJP programs.
Okay.
So it's quite a few.
And since I get a little more time, the audit of the DNA backlog reduction program, I was hoping to discuss that one. According to the IG's office, OJP requested that this audit be done to better ascertain the extent to which grantees were accurately reporting and using program income, as well as how the National Institute of Justice could better manage the program. Ms. McGarry, is that an accurate representation of how the audit and why the audit was initiated?
Yes, Congresswoman, and this is a great example of our collaborative working relationship with the OIG. We looked at the program income at the DNA grant program and saw that we thought there were issues and that we would rely on the expertise of the IG, who has forensic auditors that we don't have, to come in and help us examine this issue.
Great. I think that shows that, OJP is being proactive in terms of its own management and oversight of its programs, and the audit produced valuable results. Although it only looked at a narrow sample of 4 grantees, it found that NIJ could do a better job of identifying grantees with the potential for generating program income and working to ensure that grantees understood how to calculate income and use it appropriately. And I think that's important because too often we leap to the conclusion that individuals who are not fulfilling the requirements are doing so because they're seeking to break the law, as opposed to it being individual and grantees simply not understanding the requirements that are put on them by taking the grant. Would you say that that's correct in some instances?
I would say that that is correct, and in fact, as a follow-up to the OIG's review, our Office of Audit Assessment and Management is doing a comprehensive program assessment of program income, and we've already put instructions in to the solicitation, to applicants, to clearly provide that guidance that they need.
Well, I'm going to ask you, on for my own purposes, for my own district, I know that the Virgin Islands has had a very difficult time with OJP and with the kinds of grants that they've been given, fulfilling it and the audits that they have. And it's really held up them moving forward and being able to provide assistance to the people of the Virgin Islands. And I understand that there's been quite a bit of discussion within our local agencies that have management and oversight over that to be able to get beyond what was in the past. Everyone has said that it had a lot to do with the technical support, really providing the kind of compliance and management that they needed to have to fulfill the requirements of those grants. Do you find that you have resources and individuals who follow the grant from the beginning to the end? Because I think that one of the problems we've seen in the Virgin Islands is that they want to do the right thing. They have been audited, but the auditors change. And so they have a new person who then has to go and review all of that all over again. What are you doing regarding that?
For the Virgin Islands, we work closely with the IG. The recommendations came out of an IG audit, and that's where the role of the Office of Audit Assessment and Management. They provide that consultation and close work with the staff in the Virgin Islands, and they have made great progress over the last year resolving their issues. And then we work as the liaison between the Virgin Islands public safety staff and the IG to resolve and close those recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. You're such a great guy.
Well, you're very kind. Can you write that down for me? No.
It's on the record.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I recognize the gentleman from Michigan, the vice chair of the subcommittee on government operations, Mr. Wahlberg.
Great guy, yeah. 2 hours ago, my wife texted me a picture of her holding our new 10-month-old granddaughter in her arms that she met at the airport in Detroit, and she's spoiling her right now while I'm in this meeting. And so we'll vote that later, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, good to see you again. You discussed in your testimony the importance of monitoring grants to ensure that recipients fulfill whatever obligations or conditions they agreed to in the first place. Could you expand on that a little bit more, how that takes place, and give us a sense of what your work has shown you about OJP's monitoring of grantees and their projects?
Thank you, Congressman. What we have seen is, as a general matter, OJP doing a fine job in ensuring that the reports they get back demonstrate the money that was distributed was used, generally speaking, for the purpose of the grant. The problems we find are when we go out and learn that those reports aren't necessarily accurate that are coming back, and we find problems behind the reporting. But what we're finding isn't done systemically at a level I think should be done is reporting back on performance measures, on not just is the money being used for the purpose it was sent, but what's the result of that investment by the government and the taxpayers in the program. The example I like to cite to was a program where OJP gave out, and this is a few years ago now, but I think the example is still relevant, monies to 2 local police departments to buy drones. And
By drones?
By drones.
Okay.
And in fact, the drones were purchased. No issue about a misuse of funds. They bought the drones. The problem was the 2 departments had not gotten the FAA certificates and other regulatory approvals they needed to actually use the drones. And so when we went out, we determined that, yes, they used the funds per the grant. There was nothing improper about their use of the funds, but from a taxpayer standpoint, the drones never flew. They were never used. And so an investment had been made by the taxpayers, used by the local police as required, but after the fact, they could never get
No outcome, yeah.
them out.
Okay.
And that's an example of the kind of measurement you really want to get to. You want to get past, was there a fraud or a misuse, to hopefully there isn't, and then what was the value in return?
I guess following up, Ms. McGarry, do you believe that OJP is adequately monitoring these grants? We've just heard this testimony. Do you see additional layers in your monitoring process that you can add?
Thank you for the question. We're very committed to improving our monitoring process, and each year we evaluate the recommendations from the OIG and the GAO to make those changes. And in fact, we are focusing very closely on measuring the success of our grants to ensure accountability of results. The Office of Audit Assessment and Management has stood up a business process improvement to look OJP-wide through all the grant components to assess their performance measures and the progress reporting, and they're in the process, the business process improvement team is in the process of making recommendations. And we hope to implement to make our monitoring of performance more robust.
Give me an idea of what, at least as far as the draft so far of these proposals, what are some of those?
I have not seen the draft recommendations. I think they're still being developed, but I'm happy to get to come back to the committee and share those recommendations when we receive
I would assume it'd be in the field seeing exactly if the drone is flying, for instance, if the license hangs on the wall.
Oh, we have made absolutely specific changes around the purchase of drones. Now we put in standards and procedures in place immediately after receiving that report several years ago. And no law enforcement agency can purchase an unarmed aerial system without direct approval from the BJA director, and it must be accompanied by an FAA certification for operation.
Okay. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I hope he makes it very quickly to hold that 10-month-old grandbaby. So we're going to do a second round as time permits here, and so I'll recognize myself. So let me follow up just a little bit on some of the other information that we had, because Mr. Sedgwick was talking about the progress that we've made and how, from an outsider's point of view and from an insider's point of view, we've seen some real progress. And so as I looked at that, you were nodding, and I was seeing that smile on your face as that we can all applaud. One of the concerns that continues to keep coming up in this particular testimony is that you keep referring to the audit that the IG does. And as much as an audit is appreciated and as much as I rely on those, and Mr. Horowitz can tell you that I comb over them with great detail. And so as much as we start to rely on that, my concern really gets in terms of the internal controls, the ones that Mr. Sedgwick was talking about, that we've made great progress. In terms of performance, a performance matrix, and saying, okay, we made the right decision and these are the right things that have happened. Do you have that in place, and is that significant? And I guess what I would like to say is, in a perfect world, those performance matrix on what is there and what needs to be there, maybe to have you, Ms. McGarry, tell me what's there, and then Ms. Goodwin and Mr. Horowitz comment on what you would like to see. So I'll start with you.
Chairman Meadows, we have, as you heard, put many agency-wide standards, procedures, and internal controls to prevent and catch any problems. And we look at the continuum of the grant process. As I said, we've put in pre-award risk analysis to try to prevent problems, require financial training for new grantees that often are the ones that have trouble following the rules. We also have programmatic monitoring with recommendations, and the Office of Audit Assessment and Management follows up on all those recommendations.
And I guess I understand that, but that's not qualitative necessarily. You know, that's, again, it can be just a check of the box. We've checked with they've gone out and they said, you know, we've got the drones and we're working on it. What I'm looking for is something that is more qualitative and quantitative perhaps in its measuring, where you can, you know, for lack of a better word, you can get a score that it's a 9.2 on compliance, and I don't expect that, but something that is, so do you see my point?
Absolutely, and that is a very good question, and we have begun to make those changes. We've, in our in-depth programmatic and financial monitoring, we're requiring on our review to look at source documentation and not just take the word on a report, but to dig down and look at the source documentation and do that verification. This year, the Office of Audit Assessment and Management is setting up an quality review process to also dig in on these internal monitoring to make sure that indeed what is being reported is true from the grantees.
All right, Ms. Goodwin, what would you like to see from a GAO perspective?
I'll speak to the VOCA grants
Right.
funds that we looked at, and of those recommendations, 3 are still open.
Right.
And so if we think about, one of the recommendations we made has to do with the 12-month project period length and some of the difficulties and challenges the grantees were having in kind of just getting their awards and starting to engage in those activities. So before a grantee can actually get the award, they have to be, OJP does this review process that takes about 2 months.
Right.
And so that's 2 months of the 12 months that a grantee has to kind of engage in their activities. So when I mentioned that it was delaying a grantee's ability to kind of get their funds and then start engaging in those activities, the internal stuff that needs to happen at OJP is affecting a grantee's ability to really engage and do activities related to their grant funds. Since it's a 12-month period, 2
So
months
what
are
you're
already
saying-
gone.
So what you're saying is a delay at OJP in terms of decisions that are made cuts into their 12-month window of deploying that grant?
Exactly.
Okay. You would agree with that, Mr. Sedgwick, from an outsider? Now, I know you get grants, so I know you're going to be cautious on how you respond to this. You know, I found the ironic nature of somebody witnessing on somebody who's making the decision, but go ahead. Can you hit your mic?
Yeah, I actually coincidentally just finished writing my last grant proposal of this cycle on Monday night at 11:59. So a lot of this is fresh in my mind. Yeah, there are, for example, in the proposal I just completed, pretty clearly the first 4 months of a 2-year grant are going to be spent not actually working on the grant, but actually kind of getting in place all of the agreements and all the clearances and so on.
To make sure she's happy.
Yeah. Now, I will say one of the things in this proposal that I think speaks to the issue you're raising, because I think the way I would phrase what you're asking a question about is, it's one thing to ask people for outputs. It's another thing to ask them for outcomes. And I'd push it even further and then say, and what are the impacts? That is, you know, the output presumably affects people's behaviors in a positive direction, and that's an outcome. But then you have to ask the further question, if we improve the behavior of a bunch of people in a community, what's it do for the overall health or wellness of the community? And what I particularly, I think there's still some kind of areas for improvement in terms of clarifying that progression of outputs, which everybody's familiar with, outcomes, which people are getting more familiar with, but still the next step is the impacts. What I will give OJP tremendous credit on in this most recent proposal that I worked on that was very large was the emphasis, and I think this will get to the question you were raising, an emphasis on we had to link a problem to a goal, to an objective, to a task, and then to a deliverable. And it was over and over again in that RFP that those deliverables had to be quantifiable.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Horowitz, what about you?
Well, I think that's a big part of it, what Mr. Sedgwick just mentioned, which is in the upfront, early in the process, understanding what's the outcome that we are looking to achieve. If it's a grant related to reducing truancy, not measuring not just how many children have you put in the program, but what was the impact on truancy in the school, in the community? What measurements are you going to require the grant recipient to send to you? Because that's really what is required here. What goes on throughout this process is the inflow of information that's required of a grant recipient to OJP. That starts OAM and other entities at OJP to look at that. And when they see anomalies, they'll often call us. But it's all because of the inflow of information that's demanded, required, pursuant to the grant. So it really starts right up front. I'll add one other issue to the discussion, which I think is important, and that we're looking at in our ongoing review of the department's oversight of violent crime efforts that it has. And that is, how are the three grant-making components at the Justice Department coordinating with other law enforcement components at the Justice Department on the efforts to deliver to local law enforcement? Are those getting coordinated? Because that's another concern we've had, is it looks as though generally, there's a general statement, but the question that we're asking is the grant making that's going out to the local, state and local law enforcement, which obviously is partnering with federal law enforcement,
Right,
and the FBI and DEA and ATF and marshals, et cetera, is there coordination going on within the Justice Department itself over how best to deal with and serve law enforcement needs at the local level? And so that's another issue.
And so you're saying that that's not happening? Is that happening, Ms. McGarry?
Well, certainly.
To the
we-
extent that it needs to happen? How about that? I'll
But
give
we
you a
share that
qualifier.
goal of having coordination.
I understand that.
And
Is
we
it-
are
is it-
doing
Is
it.
it happening or not?
Yes, in the Violence
Really?
Reduction Network, the grant components are working side by side with the DOJ law enforcement.
And so you have how it affects violent crimes and how the outcomes. So we would like to have a copy of that, because I haven't been able to find that. Mr. Horowitz, or what am I
We're in
missing?
process of the audit, so probably
So you're saying that you actually have that, Ms. McGarry?
Through,
Because it's like building a school and educating someone and not having whether they get a job or not. That's the analogy that I make, is that if we're going to invest this kind of dollars, and whether it's drug intervention or juvenile violence or abuse or any of those, we can do a lot of great programs. But if it doesn't stop what we're trying to stop, then it's just money that's being spent. It's like going to a university and ending up coming back driving a taxi cab because you can't get a job because of the degree you get. Do you follow me?
absolutely, and we share your goal, and as Mr. Sedgwick
So do you
said,
have the matrix to be able to figure out whether we're doing that?
we've put the matrix in the solicitation, and our business process improvement work we're doing is how can we better capture that to tell that complete story.
So will you commit to this committee that in the next 120 days that you will look at what you put in, what Mr. Sedgwick just had to put his grant proposal in for, in terms of a way for you to monitor this going forward? And this all comes back to what we see as the Navajo issue. And my big concern there is, As a fiscal conservative, I get beat up every time I give money for grants. And I have defended you, I've defended the Department of Justice on a number of grant operations as a fiscal conservative. But any time that we build two prisons 75 miles apart that really are not being occupied and really don't have, unless you're going to ship in federal inmates from outside the Navajo territory, it's going to be very hard to fill it up. I mean, I know the numbers and I know what it is in my district, and you're going to be shipping in inmates to fill up something that you didn't have to build, and that we've got a $32 million excess. Do you see the problem?
We certainly are taking this issue
So
seriously.
you don't see it as a problem?
I see it as an issue that we're still in the process of working with the IG and the Navajo Nation
Okay,
to resolve.
Here's my, and I'm going to be nice. I want to go home, and you seem like a real nice individual, and so I'm going to be a little bit perhaps indirect in my suggestion. We need within a 60-day time frame for you to get back to this committee on how you're going to resolve the outstanding issues with the IG. And I don't mean that we're taking it serious and we're working hard. I mean a real plan on how we're going to get this resolved, because it inherently undermines the potential for future grants and future funding if this is believed to be across all of your grant-making capability. And I'm here, your sworn testimony today is this is isolated and you're committed to getting it worked. Is that correct?
We are committed to resolving these issues.
And this is isolated.
In my, this is an anomaly that we're working through.
All right, I recognize the ranking member for a series of questions.
Thank you. Dr. Sedgwick, you have done some enormous work in this area and have a vast amount of experience with OJP. I wanted to talk with you about the arduous process for applicants that has in the past, and there's been some discussion about the lack of transparency. And if we want the best programs to apply for OJP grant dollars, we must have a process that's completely fair. Now, you talked in your testimony about the improvements that you have seen regarding detailed online training and releasing unedited peer review comments and et cetera. You've also testified about that in your tenure, the Office of Audit, Assessment, and Management was created. Can you tell us why this office was created?
I think to get at a lot of the questions that you all have been asking today. These are not new questions. The whole notion, the Office of Justice Programs distributes a very large amount of money to law enforcement and to public safety in all its various manifestations in the United States. And there's always questions about, was that money appropriately used, and did it have the intended effect? So this is, these are not new issues. These have always been there, and I think they always will be there. And so that's why in my written statement I ended with a comment about the importance of a culture of continuous improvement, because I think, during my tenure and my experience in OJP and its predecessor, OJARS, the organization's come a long way. But there's always going to be challenges, in part because the nature of the problems that OJP is trying to address are constantly changing. I'm kind of struck by when I was in the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 1984, the only thing anybody cared about were the FBI index crimes. So you really worried about 7 crimes. I'm away for 22 years. I come back to BJS in 2006, and all of a sudden people are talking about internet crimes against children and human trafficking and a whole set of crimes that, quite frankly, nobody even thought about in 1984. And so, you've got an agency that is grappling with an ever-changing mix of what constitutes illegal behavior in the United States. At the same time that that's going on, so it's trying to chase a moving target, the bar is being raised. And I think OJP has worked very hard at raising its own performance and moving along that continuum that I mentioned earlier, where in the old days you only monitored outputs. Now we're well into the era of monitoring outcomes in terms of, all right, you ran this many people through your program, how did you move the needle? Tell me what improvement looks like and how does that get measured? And I think now we're on the cusp of people beginning to say, well, okay, if we change the behavior of X number of citizens in a community, what's that do to make that community better, safer? We used to toss around the phrase well-being, community wellness, but I think that has to be taken very seriously. How is the community qualitatively improved as a result of the programs that are being funded by the Office of Justice Programs?
And is that what the Office of Audit, Assessment, and Management?
Very much was part of helping, first of all, helping applicants understand their responsibility in terms of measuring the effectiveness of what they were doing and reporting it to OJP. Then also helping OJP use that information that they were receiving from the field to say, all right, how is this particular grantee performing? Okay, they've got a great proposal, looks good, but is the needle moving? And how would we know, right? And I think that's a very important part of what the purpose of the Office of Audit Assessment and Management was. I can remember I was in BJS when that agency actually first got authorized and stood up, and it, kind of taking a whole set of bureaus within OJP and getting them to accept the idea that this Office of Audit Assessment and Management was going to kind of get them to adopt a common set of performance measures was a bit of a chore. I mean, if you go way back to my beginning, 1984, before the reauthorization of the Justice Department, in 1984, every one of the bureaus in what is now OJP was by statute completely independent, except for one thing. The Assistant Attorney General had to approve your press releases, but everything else you could do on your own. So part of what you're kind of looking at and the kind of challenge is overcoming a culture. Now, you might say that's 32 years ago, but in organizations and bureaucracies, 32 years is like saying before lunch today, right? I mean, for us, it seems like a generation, but in organizational terms, a lot of organizations, 32 years is the blink of an eye, and it takes a lot of work to move a culture of an organization like OJP, where you have a history of autonomy, and get people to cooperate, right?
And you
work
feel that it's
together.
moving that way?
Absolutely. I don't have any doubt at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The chair recognizes the vice chair of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a gun buyback program, PSN Philadelphia Safety Net program, and in that program, the policy was to give away $100 gift cards in exchange for guns. However, hundreds of the gift cards went missing, and the sole employee and executive director of PSN reportedly used grant money to pay for personal things like parking tickets, hotel stay, gasoline purchases, clothing, restaurants, meals, and cash withdrawals. And so, Ms. McGarry, did OJP know before PSN gun buyback program was concluded in March of 2012 that funds were being misspent?
Well, we've put several agency-wide standards and procedures in place to catch these type of problems. And became aware of the issues, and our prevention mechanisms now are, this grantee was an earmark and now would be put through the pre-award risk, and as a new grantee and as a small nonprofit would be required to do financial training to prevent these type of problems.
But did you know before it was concluded that the misspending had taken place?
I'm not personally aware. I believe that our managers did not know the extent of the problem.
Has there been any check to find out why the managers didn't know that there was a problem?
Yes, and that's part of our continuous improvement. We've enhanced our grant manager training. We've added questions for programmatic managers about financial, when they're going out, to give them checks to look more deeply into financial conditions of grantees. So that is part of our continuous improvement, always learning from these irregularities and issues and making changes to help prevent them in the future.
Feel pretty confident now that an entity like that, with basically one sole manager of the program, executive director, with this much money, is detected? Hopefully before.
Yes, I think the measures of our pre-award risk assessment and intensive oversight of this type of a grantee would be solid to detect and prevent these problems.
Mr. Horowitz, what was OJP's oversight like throughout that program as you looked into it?
Well, we obviously saw a series of concerns there in the way the funds were being used, the lack of controls, matching up the gift cards that were given out with the firearms that were being purchased. In fact, there are still unaccounted for numbers of gift cards, because there were more gift cards given out than there were guns
brought in.
collected. One of the things particularly concerning to us was that the executive director of the agency received almost $350,000 in compensation, awarded by his sister, who was the chairman of the board. So those kinds of self-dealing, conflicts, lack of controls over program obviously represent
Would that have
serious
been
concerns.
expected as normal to see that, if you saw that type of relationship, brother and sister, running a program with that much money attached to it? Handing out gift cards, over $300,000 salary. Should that have been something that would have been sniffed out very quickly?
It's certainly something that, if not done quickly, given the lapse of time, certainly we would have hoped that at some point along the way, that those kinds of controls that were lacking at a place like PSN would have been identified sooner. And again, part of this goes to reporting back on results. What were the results of this audit? Well, if the executive director is taking a third of the money or so for himself, then there's a problem with the program.
Mm-hmm. At what point during the process would PSN have reported to OJP what it was spending the money on? I asked that of Ms. McGarry.
Each grantee has to submit a quarterly financial report, and in that report, they would designate what the money was being spent for. And this is one of the improvements we've put in place, is to not just rely on these reports, but to have our managers look for source documents through the process.
And stay on top of it. Okay.
We're trying.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. This has been a good hearing. I want to just thank each of you for your time. We have a few to-dos that are out there, and Ms. McGarry, I would encourage you strongly to work with Ms. Goodwin and Mr. Horowitz in terms of those measurable matrix that I talk about, performance standards, how we can make sure. You have such a kind way of coming back that it makes a guy like me actually have empathy for you, and I guess that's a good thing, you know. So it's but in doing that, I want to underscore the seriousness of some of this, and I'd love to come and visit with your sub-agency and thank your workers for the job that they do. It's real easy when we start to focus in on these problem areas to suggest that everything is awful. And we didn't hear that today, that everything was awful. I think we heard some real things that concern us. And what concerns me is not just with the hardworking American taxpayer dollar that we're looking at in this $32 million discrepancy. What concerns me is the long-term viability of a grant program that I see a real need in, that has benefited my constituents, and that if we allow these kind of things to happen and continue to happen, that the money will go away, because they're going to use the Navajo example or perhaps the buyback program example, and they're going to paint a broad brush. And what that means is that there will be individuals without protective body armor, perhaps, if there were not the right amounts of money spent. And so to put it in perspective, and I really want we made a commitment here to work on these two outstanding issues with Mr. Horowitz and his team, but I want to put it in perspective. When we look at increasing something 250%, you know, so we went from the original design, we expanded it 250% based on a couple of jurisdictional areas that should not increase the inmate population that much. It's like building, originally setting out to build the Capitol, this facility, and instead building National Stadium and then building National Stadium again. So do you see why it really creates a real problem? The numbers are going to have to, I'm going to continue to follow up, and I want to hear back from you as we've suggested. But again, I want to thank all of you for your testimony, and if there is no further business before the committee on government operations stands adjourned.